So discipline has an interesting root word of disciple. What does disciple mean? A follower. Uh, Someone who learns. Someone who is receiving the teachings of a master. Teaching others. You can be discipling them by teaching them. So 3 different things came to mind whenever Uncle Stephen asked me to do church discipline. The first one was being a disciplined church. A lot of times we have a good idea of what it means to have discipline within the church, to correct someone. But I think it has a missing component where the church itself needs to have discipline. So what does it look like for a church to have discipline, to be a disciplined church? What are the disciplines of Christianity? If I was to say the disciplines of Christianity, what would that bring up in your minds? Okay. So the spiritual disciplines. So you have prayer. You have reading the Bible. What are some of the other ones? Obedience to what? To God's word? Okay. So this says there are 10 disciplines. You have Bible reading, Bible study, Bible memorization, prayer, generosity, fellowship, fasting, silence, simplicity, and celebration. I don't necessarily believe that all of those are the disciplines, but I think that they all have important values that we can take from them. For instance, silence. There are times to talk and times to be silent, right? That's what Ecclesiastes tells us. There's a time for everything under the sun. But there are also times when we shouldn't be silent as well. There are times to mourn. There are times to celebrate. And I think a disciplined church needs to have those qualities entrenched in their body, not in the group getting together every Sabbath, but also inside the members themselves. I think a lot of times we teach about those things, but we end up leaving them off once we leave the church. So for 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, maybe we have those disciplines. But do we carry through the prayer that we have, the prayer requests that were brought forward through our daily lives? Do we continue to lift up one another's cares during our own prayer time? What do we look like in our home life? Are we remembering to pray? Are we remembering to read the Bible? Are we remembering to study, to memorize? Are we remembering to fellowship? And I think that a church can't effectively discipline its members if its members themselves are not disciplined. If they do not have the disciplines that being a Christian requires of us in our daily lives. So how do we promote that? How do we promote being a disciplined church? Anybody have any thoughts? I usually prefer to hear yours before I give mine, because
and some of us want to hear other people's before we say something controversial or something that might conflict with what you might say.
Well, I think that
so and
go ahead.
Just
Sorry.
as introduction to that thought of, I've actually had several discussions on this subject. The question being, as you say, how do we get this? How do we get the church? Is that your question?
Yeah. How do we become? How do we spur on a disciplined church? How do we obtain?
So this would be in regards to the 7 disciplines. Some churches preach and teach the 7 disciplines, and that we should work harder at that, with the idea that that leads to greater spiritual maturity. But there's also the thought process that if we seek spiritual maturity, that will lead us into practicing more of the 7 disciplines. So there's kind of a disagreement as how you get the church to do it.
Okay, so both of those seem to go pretty hand in hand, I would say. But I think that so my thought is that in order to have a disciplined church, there needs to be accountability. Because it's great to teach it on a regular basis. It's great to encourage it, but if it doesn't get put into practice, then it loses its value. Head knowledge only goes so far, right? That it's the ability to act upon it that brings the value. And so my thought is we need to have discipleship where we have accountability to the people that we are in discipleship with. And usually we use the term accountability partners, right? Or maybe that's what I've always heard. So maybe you guys have used different terms, but holding each other accountable to the things that we are striving to do. But a lot of people, once they turn maybe 18 and they become an adult in the eyes of the government, they don't want to have somebody telling them that they need to be doing something, right? We kind of are authority adverse, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of what you're talking about and doing is the fact that we need to be accountable to ourselves first. If we're doing it in our lives, then our life should show it to other people, and it's easier to disciple somebody else if we have been accountable through ourselves. So if somebody's sitting there telling me that I need to do something and this and that or something else, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, you don't do it, so why should I do it? Then that's not going to do us much good. But if we're doing it ourselves, and then we're showing it, not just telling, but just showing it in our lives, then it'll work a whole lot better. Right?
I agree. However, if this is a new concept and nobody is let's say there's a church where nobody is fulfilling any of the church disciplines on their own, then we need some sort of accountability to one another in order to spur each other on to the good works that we're encouraged to do and instructed to do in the Bible. And I think that all of us at least have one, probably, spiritual discipline that we either fail to do or do not do as regularly as we maybe should. For me, I haven't fasted in several years. So I have not done that spiritual discipline. And to be honest, I don't even think about it on a regular basis. But if we took upon ourselves and as a church agreed to have a disciplined church and to agree to what that disciplined church means, then I think that we could create those accountability partnerships without causing that strife that maybe would be a detriment to building that discipline. And I think being honest with one another prior to even starting the accountability would be a great place to start. We need to be upfront with the fact that maybe we don't remember to pray X number of times today, and we want to pray X number of times a day. Or maybe we don't do fasting, or maybe we don't know how to do fasting, or we don't know why to do fasting. I think that growth comes with honesty. And if we're not willing to be honest with one another, then that means, I think, that we don't trust one another. And if we don't trust one another, then there's a break there in the how we are intended to be as Christians. We should be able to trust one another with anything. It says to confess one another, to confess your sins to one another, right? And if we are able to confess our sins, how much more so should we be able to confess where it's not a sin, but it's just something that we neglect? So I guess the question is, do we have a trust-based relationship with one another? If we do not have a trust-based relationship with one another, and we can't do the accountability, how do we build that trust-based relationship? So this is not the direction I intended to take this class, but I like the conversation that we're having. I think it's productive, and I hope you guys find it productive too. So how do we build a trust-based relationship with the people who are in our church, the people that we see on a regular basis, the people that can hold us accountable? We test them. Okay? So how would you test me?
Tell you something and see what happens.
Okay. Tell me something and see what happens. Okay.
See if it goes anywhere else.
Okay. So it takes a little bit of a leap of faith at least, because it has to be something that is important enough that we don't want other people to know, but is something that's not too important in that we can't live with the knowledge of it getting out, right? Interesting. Well, can we build a trust-based relationship? Well, can we start with a system of trust-based relationships that are already there? Because you don't have to have trust in everybody in the church, right? To build an accountability partnership. You only have to have, each person only needs to have one other person or maybe two other people that they trust. Yes.
I think building a friendship, that's going to start your trust issue. I think building a friendship is going to start that trust. And because I wouldn't just go up to Joe Blow and just say everything that's on my heart, you know. First, I've got to know him. And so by building a friendship, inviting somebody to your home, that's really a good way to start building a friendship and trust in people. Interacting with them, playing games, whatever it is, you'll learn that what kind of person that is the more time you spend with them. That's what I think.
That's true. Yeah, it's a lot easier to trust somebody and to understand somebody whenever you spend time with them. Which brings up an interesting point in the disciplines, fellowship. It says, "Do not forsake the fellowshipping." Yeah. So, are we doing that? Are we forsaking fellowshipping with one another? Are we intentionally seeking to fellowship not just with the people that are our best friends in the church, but also the people that maybe we don't know very well, maybe the newcomer that came to our church? Are we seeking to build that relationship with all of the people that are in the church?
That seems to happen, sadly, in a lot of different churches. New people come into the church and they're not greeted immediately with the kind of fellowshipping that they were seeking. But thanks to our government and the COVID issue, the fellowship factor has fallen off greatly. I know of several churches that very few people to this day still go to church. They'd rather do it all online. It's not the same.
I was going to say, you know, inviting someone to your home. One camp meeting, I was asked to house somebody that I didn't think I would like to have in my home at all because I thought they were strange. You know, for me, strange for me. But, you know, I went ahead and had them in my home, and I never knew what kind of person they were. They were lovely, and I really enjoyed the time that I spent with them, and we developed a nice friendship. But don't always, somebody looks crazy, don't think they're crazy, you know. They were wonderful people, and I would have them again in my home anytime.
That's awesome. So I think here at camp meeting is an excellent time for us to put the things that we've been talking about here into practice. So who are we spending time with here at camp meeting? Something to think about. You know, we should be intentionally building relationships with people maybe outside of our normal groups to encourage that fellowship and build those trust relationships. And then, just like you were saying, Marilyn, we might find somebody that becomes a really good friend. Does this go to 2:30? Okay, so we're halfway done, and we've only discussed one of the three things I wanted to. So what does discipleship look like? We talked about building a disciplined church and the things that maybe we need to do to encourage one another and to build a church and encourage a church that has discipline. But how do we build discipleship? I think I think that all three of these topics kind of go hand in hand, and that's why I wanted to go over all three of them. So how do we build discipleship when maybe people don't feel like they need to be discipled or have a discipleship program? It's something that we've kind of fallen away from, right? We had a lot of disciples in with Jesus. Jesus he sent out the 70 disciples, and he had the 12 apostles. So how do we encourage that to return, I guess, to be something that we not only have in our church, but is something that people desire?
I'll say that one of the things, one of the roadblocks to discipleship, formal discipleship in a church, is just that we are all so busy. You know, we have so many other commitments that sometimes it just feels like one more would just be the camel that, the needle that breaks the camel's back, the straw that breaks the camel's back. There you go.
Yeah, but so here's the problem I have with that. We are all fairly busy, but what are the most important things that we need to be focused on? And are the things that we're focused on the most important things, or are we? So there's a professor who had a glass jar, and he put a bunch of big rocks, or let's say he filled it with sand first, and he's like, "Is the jar full?" And the jar was pretty full. He couldn't stick any large rocks or any small rocks or anything like that, but he poured water in it, and the water could fill in all the gaps that was in the jar. And I think that's kind of how our lives are. We've got all this sand that's in our jar, and we can pour a little bit of water in, but we don't have the rocks. And the rocks are the things that are like the important things that we need to be focused on. And we need to make sure that we have our lives filled with the rocks first, and then we can stick smaller rocks in, and then we can fill in with sand, and then we can put the water in on top, and everything will fit. But if we put in the sand first, the rocks will never fit. The big rocks will never fit. So I think we need to maybe take a look at our lives and ask ourselves, What's the priority order of the things that I'm involved with? And is there some things that we can maneuver around that are maybe lower priority? For instance, a lot of times, Sabbath afternoons, we go out to mom and dad's and we spend time with them. It's a very important thing, right? But that doesn't mean that I can't take 1 hour out of that time to spend discipling somebody. Just meet up with them and say, hey, how's your week been? What are you struggling with? What can I pray with you about? These are the things that I'm struggling with. These are the things that I would ask you to pray about. Or, let's say we're mowing lawns. We spend every Sunday mowing our lawn. It's an important thing, right? But can we start an hour earlier, get done an hour earlier, and then spend that time discipling somebody? I think that we have ways to maneuver our time, but it's easy for us to say that we don't have time. And I think that that's the issue. Is not that we don't have the time, but that we're not willing to find the time that works. Does that make sense? So if we are able to make the time, and it's an important thing that we value and we feel needs to be prioritized, then how can we then take that and start something that works? So we recognize with our conversation earlier that we require somebody that we trust. So I think we start there. We say, okay, we want to be a disciplined church. We want to set up some, we can even call it an accountability instead of discipleship, so that it doesn't have that one person is above the other person. We just say it's accountability. And we can ask people to find somebody in the church. And maybe somebody ends up with 2 accountability partners. And I think that would be okay. And maybe they don't have to meet together every week. Maybe a phone call is enough. And they can meet with them maybe in person once a month to reduce the amount of time the time commitment that is required. I think that there's a lot of things that we can do to encourage this outcome to come about. I think it requires a church body that desires to do God's will. Because if the church body doesn't desire to do God's will, then this kind of becomes more of a busy work than a valuable tool.
So I think one of the obstacles we have is we view church stuff as separate from everything else. So when they say, "Oh, I've got to evangelize to my neighbor," or "I have to be a disciple to a mentor and then disciple my kids," that I have to somehow schedule something separate. And then what? Then you have this problem. Well, I've got all this stuff to do. I don't have time for all the separate stuff. Mentorship and discipleship should be organic to what we're doing. My dad discipled me by me working with him. We didn't have this special time where he'd say, "Hey, Jeremy, what's going on?" But every day when we drove to work, and he showed interest in my life, and sometimes we talk about cars, and sometimes we talk about planes, and sometimes we talk about that teacher that just seems to have it out for me and all of that stuff. And that was the discipleship. And never once did my dad say, "It's time, here's the discipleship appointment," where we went out for coffee, and he focused on one thing. He integrated it into every single facet of his interaction with me. And I think in the modern world, one of our big problems is the rest of our life is very separated. We all go do different jobs away from each other. We go shopping away from each other. We do household chores away from each other. And we don't ever get a chance to just work together and have lunch together and to solve problems together, because that's when I think, for a guy in particular, I will say, I grow really close to guys when we overcome an obstacle together. Car broke down, I can't figure out what to do, a friend comes along, or we're going to do this, we solve it. We kind of have this bonding moment of heroism. We overcame, we slayed the dragon, right? The car's running again. And then when I have a problem, I trust him and I call him and say, "Hey, my wife and I just had this huge fight, and I need to know, am I in the wrong?" And I trust him now when he says, "Well, yeah, you kind of were. You might have been right over here, but the way you handled it was way out of line." And it's really hard to just say, "Hey, you need to trust this guy." Why? But if you work together, if you've done stuff together, then that trust builds up and these things occur. And I think forced discipleship is really hard to do, if not impossible. We need to be looking for ways that the youth get together with the youth leader and they say, "We're going to go over to brother so-and-so's and we're going to mow his lawn." And when we stop for lemonade and brother so-and-so's telling us about his time serving in the military and when he was really scared, and we start bonding and connecting with each other, and he's really appreciative that we pruned those trees that's out of his reach and it's not safe for him to be on a ladder anymore, and then start to connect. And then I've got this problem. I remember brother so-and-so had a similar situation 45 years ago, but I bet he has some ideas for me. I'm not afraid to call him and get that connection, because it was created by just doing stuff together, everyday stuff together that wasn't forced.
Yes, up here.
I just want to share something that it can go right along with this as far as discipling, working together and helping. Last year, we had a lot of trees that we'd cut down here on the property. And one day they had, if I remember right, they had like 18 guys from the church, a bunch of chainsaws, 2 log splitters, 1 excavator, 1 tractor with a loader, and a bunch of stuff like that, and a great big tilt trailer. And they all got together and cut firewood to take it up for a couple of old people that can't go out and do it for themselves anymore. And all the fun they were having out there, you just look around and see the young guys, the old guys, all of them working together and helping. And, they had a project and they were working together. That's discipling to me. You get a project, you're working for the Lord, basically helping these older people, not just because we're old, but anyway, there's little ways like that you can do, that you can disciple and help bring somebody out. Anyway, that's just a thought.
You can start with new people in the church and inviting them to come do and showing how much you could enjoy doing what they're doing. And you can let them know how much you appreciate what they're doing. And after this happened, when we go to church and stuff, all these people that came to help us, we would stop, or I would stop and tell them, "Thank you," I would give them a hug, or I would tell them how much they're appreciated for what they're doing, or how special they are to us. And that's a lot of what we need to do.
Oh, and another thing too, they also came up and unloaded it, stacked it up in the woodshed and everything else. We had some of our neighbor friends up there come along too, and they were all witnessing and talking back and forth, discipling everybody. And those are Mormons. So, anyway.
So then, how, if we no longer have that daily interaction? Yeah. Then how, if we don't have the daily interaction, how do we work on discipleship inside of the church?
Are you saying having daily interaction is off the table?
No, I'm saying if we don't, because as Jeremy was saying, we don't really.
Maybe we have to get it.
Okay. So how do we get that daily interaction then? Because there's a lot of people, say like me, that works remotely and doesn't have a daily interaction with anybody outside of my family. So how do we encourage discipleship if we do not have that daily interaction? How do we obtain the daily interaction? Yes.
One thing you could do is take your dog and go to the park and work. And it's funny how many people, just by being in the public and looking at people and smiling, you make a connection, and then it goes from there.
If you're working or doing something and you think of somebody, something I don't like doing, I don't like talking on the phone. But if you think of somebody, if God prompts you in your mind if God prompts you think of somebody that you're doing, all of a sudden you need to pick up the phone and give a call and say, hi, how are you? What's going on? Could you, and just talk for 5-10 minutes and you're fine. If you have to even that much. I'm not a telephone person. So for me, that would be something really hard to do. But if God is wanting me to do it, that's what I need to be doing.
So I think we do need to be more intentional, though, as a church in our discipling. We need to make sure that we are. I think that it's something that we've kind of let fall by the wayside. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was disciplining the members of the church. So I think that we need to have a disciplined church to be able to properly discipline the members of the church. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on that, though.
What's the question again?
So I think that to be able to properly discipline a member of the church, in order to, if a member does something wrong that requires discipline, I think we need to have a church that itself is a disciplined church where the members are disciplined. But I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Well, going back to what I said previously, so, when I look at my kids, if I tell my kids they can't do something, they don't have a lot of recourse because I'm going to enforce that, especially when they're little, they got paddled when they did something wrong. If someone comes into church and you just tell them, hey, you're way out of line and you need to make these changes in their life, they're going to walk out the door and never come back. Unless there's already a friendship developed. Because when there's a friendship and your friend says, hey, buddy, I don't want to hound you, but your smoking really worries me. And I would like to help you overcome that. And that ability to guide and mold the course of people that they're traveling on is incredibly dependent on the relationship being there first. We see that with Jesus. He came out and he said, my flesh is meat and my blood is drink. And a whole bunch of people said, you're cuckoo. And they walked off. But his core group that he had a relationship with and that knew him, they said, where else are we going to find the words of life? Of course we're not leaving. We're friends already. We know you. We know who you are. So I just go back to that. That has to be the foundation of whatever we're doing, is that we have that relationship where we can trust each other. And that, again, the trust is a result. We can't force trust. It's a result. It's other things cause it, and it is interacting. I love potlucks because it's so organic. Now I do think we have to remind ourselves that potluck, don't sit with the same person every Sabbath. You got to mix and mingle and get out of your comfort zone. But it is an opportunity where you just get to be with people and talk to them and learn who they are. But even that has limitations. My dad, he would tell me, if he wants to learn who someone is, he would work with them. He'd volunteer to build something with the church. I remember when I was very little, we were living in Southern California, and the church needed some props for a play. And my dad willfully said, this is an opportunity for me to get to know XYZ member in the church. They're also a woodworker. He asked him if he wanted to help. They went and they worked on it together, and he got a friendship out of it. He was very intentional in that particular regard. He's like, I could do this by myself. He didn't need help. But he saw it as a way to have this chance with someone else where that other person could kind of show off their skills and that they could have a friendship. And they did a whole bunch of stuff together after that, doing things with the church because that choice was made. And I totally agree. We have to be intentional. We have to make opportunities, but the opportunities we make, there still has to be a certain organic wildness to them. Getting together for a game of softball and knowing we have no clue how this is going to turn out. But it's going to get people together. We don't know who's going to show up. We don't, there's a lot of things we don't know, but there's a huge amount of it. We just have to do stuff together. And I do think working together, Jesus, how did he teach his disciples? They worked with him. He didn't say, I'm going to give you a lecture on how to cast out demons. They went with him and they watched him cast out demons. And I think there were a few times where they were scared silly. But they saw how he did it. And then he said, okay, now it's your turn. And then they came back and said, hey, boss, we met a demon tougher than us. He said, that's, he showed them how to deal with that too, But there was definitely this, they worked with him. And that's how they became the great men that they ended up.
So that kind of goes back to what we were discussing with the fellowship. We need to be intentional also about making sure that we're fellowshipping with one another. And I think it has to be outside of the normal church setting, because potluck is great, but potluck's 30 minutes, maybe an hour. And so we need to have more time outside of that where we're getting together with people. And that's kind of why we're moving to Brookfield, why we bought a different house, is because we found that being in the Moberly area, we weren't able to do that fellowshipping that we desired whenever we moved out to Missouri.
That's just fellowshipping with the Bulldogs, not the Tigers. That's not going to work when the bell game comes along.
if you guys had had a house in Marceline that would have worked.
I was just going to share a thought on, so one aspect I don't think has been touched on yet, but discipline in and of itself, is if it's just a thing unto itself, it has no purpose, no meaning. And so discipline has to be joined together with a shared passion, a shared vision for something. And so like you talk about football, if the goal is just to go out and run wind sprints until you puke, no one comes, right? There has to be a shared vision that we're going to come together and we're going to accomplish something. As Christians, our shared vision is Christ. And there has to be, everything that we do has to be collated around that shared passion, that shared vision, that shared understanding that we want to know him more. And I think unless we communicate that really clearly and everybody has a sense of we're going somewhere because we're following the master kind of thing, then discipline makes sense. But until you have that vision, it really doesn't. It feels like busy work.
Yeah, we did kind of touch on that a little bit by saying that we all have, in order for discipline to work, it had to be a church that is desiring to do God's will and to become more like Christ.
So let me just throw in a little more. I think we're saying a lot of the similar things in a different way, and each adds a little bit to it maybe. Working together. We don't work together very often, because we're busy, and we don't have common jobs that need to be done. It takes more than just working together. For example, if we all go mow somebody's yard, you can take your mower, I can take my mower, and David can take his mower, and we might all mow a third of the yard, but we wouldn't get necessarily a connection there, the kind that we're talking for here about trust. So, and in the non-religious world, they have studied this extensively and have found that engaged employees, not only do they work together, all employees work together, right? You're hired to come to work and you work together, but you can have very disengaged employees. So the difference is if they have a common goal, and it's not just, everybody's working on the same goal, they all believe and own the goal, which is kind of what David's saying here. But it's not just believing the same thing, it's setting out to accomplish the same thing. So what I'm trying to add to this and tie a lot of this together, all that we say and are touching on it, and in reality in our society, we don't do any of it. We very seldom work together. Tom and Linda and Beth and I drove out here together. That's a fairly major shared activity that's like, we don't do that very often. Don't want to do it very often. Well, and they're still here. I should not say that just exactly. But you know what I'm saying? It makes us uncomfortable. You talk about sitting with somebody you don't know at potluck. Well, that a lot of times just gets down to be downright awkward. People sit with who makes them feel the most comfortable, make them enjoy the potluck the most. Nobody wants to do something awkward, and the only way you're going to do something awkward is if somebody makes it a mandate. God wants to make you do this. Then I'll go, okay, I'll go sit with the guy. See, we're missing something here. And so what I'm saying is the missing part of that is that that shared goal for the work. And they found this in the workplace. If everybody rallies around selling X number of units this month because it means something to everybody, they'll never agree on how to do it, but it will tie them together. So that's, you see, it's layer on layer on layer, but to tie people together, they have to own the same goal. And I don't know that hardly anybody owns the same goal. I mean, Tom and Linda and Beth and I, we own the same goal to get to camp. But our goal for being here this week could be black and white different. I don't know that we share any goals about being at this camp. I don't know if any two people at this camp share a goal about what this camp's going to do. Shared effort to achieve an outcome. I mean, that starts to get so far down the trail, I almost hesitate to share that. But this is something that in the non-church world, people are trying to understand how people connect, and they found other factors. All these factors are part of it, but if they don't own a common goal, so how do we get a common goal? How do we get to spend time together regularly? That's the very beginning. How do you even spend time together? But then how do you actually spend time on a common goal? How do you even own the same goal? I don't know. Does David and I own any common goals?
I hope so.
Which one are you thinking of? Well, so what is a goal of Jesus? I mean, really? Okay, we both care about Jesus. I have a suspicion if we sit down and talked about what it means to get closer to Jesus, we'd probably be worlds apart, raising the question, do we even share the common goal of getting close to Jesus? Yeah, 90% of the problem is we don't even know what our goals are.
Right, but also we don't have actionable. Okay, all right. Okay. But I agree. Once you get into the business world, once you get in the work world, if I show up with the crew and I say our goal is to build a house, nothing gets done. If I say the goal is to lay out the floor joists, well then the floor joists get laid out, and now set floor joists, and now deck it, and now lay out walls, and now we don't have actionable short-term goals. We have very nebulous, large end goals of I want to be like Jesus and go to heaven, and like okay, that's great. Yes, sir. I don't know. It absolutely changes the work, but I don't know how to control that very well. Like my dad and I have had this conversation many times. I can teach someone how to read a tape measure. I can't teach someone how to get up and go to work on time. If someone doesn't show up with a certain amount of fire in their belly, it's really hard to beat it into them. And I don't. It absolutely does. But to a certain extent, I don't have the answer, and I don't know. But I do know that you can get a group of people that do have some fire in them, but if you don't have an actionable goal, you just sit around and stare at each other. Yeah, both things.
I think that we're asking a lot of questions that if you guys are going to take the questions with you and answer them, then I think it's profitable. If you don't, then I think we might have just wasted an hour. So, go ahead.
Is there a difference between discipline of a believer and discipline of an unbeliever in your church?
I think so.
And what would that be?
Well, disciplining an unbeliever is probably going to drive them away. Disciplining a believer is probably going to bring them in. Well, hopefully, that's the intention of disciple, right? Is to teach, to teach behavior, to change behavior, is what it means to disciple somebody. You don't disciple them to have the same behavior that they already have. You disciple them to have better behavior, to fulfill more of the church disciplines, to be more like Christ. And if you're giving discipline as a church to somebody who does not accept the authority of God, then what's the point? They're just going to walk away.
I heard a real key just now. Discipleship is to assist them in being Christians and serving the Lord, not to make them. So God showed me a long time ago that He wants me to build people up in the Lord, especially those who are not Christians, to build them up in their personalities, wherever they need building up in their life, in their ego, whatever, to build them up, and then they'll be more receptive to wanting to be built up in good things. And that's the other thing I learned was that one of the talk show hosts, probably Mark Levian, said the most important thing is to turn out good people. And so, helping each other be good will change the world.
So maybe this goes along with that line. We can't force somebody to accept the change we believe they should make. So can we term that we're trying to guide someone to make a change in their behavior? If they are a believer in our church, then we're trying to guide them to change their behavior because they're a part of our group. And we are brothers. We are one. If they are a visitor, they're unsaved, then we offer them the guidance to change so that they can become part of our group. So yes, it is different.
I wanted to just give an example from my work life, that I'm a supervisor, and so one of the things that recently I've been shorthanded in my work. So we've had some people that have left us, and so trying to do the same amount of work with the fewer people. So it's required me to go out and do the actual work myself that my employees were doing. And so and it's been a while since I've done that, just on a day-to-day basis. And so the point I'm getting at is there's some things I had forgotten about being out in the field, dealing with people, working with people, trying to encourage them to do what's right. And so one of the keys about fire in your belly, encouraging other people to have fire in their belly, is to have the fire in your belly, to really know why you're doing what you're doing, why you're telling people to do it this way. You're telling your employees, this is the way you approach somebody, this is the way you deal with this situation. It's to just know it yourself and be able to have that knowledge and skill and ability. And so having that fire in their belly as a Christian is going to be spread. It's going to spread. And so I think that's maybe, as we're trying to consider how we're going to disciple other people, that's going to be one of the keys, is having that for yourself.
So it is 2:30 now. I don't know if there's anything that butts up against this, or if
We've got a little bit of a break until 3:15, I think. Let me look at the schedule. The next session starts at 2:45.
so we only have 15 minutes between.
15 minutes, yep.
Okay, so does anybody have any last minute thoughts that they wanted to, Uncle Tom?
How does the degree of what they do wrong affect the discipline?
Well, I think the degree, it's a matter of the punishment should be a equivalent to the crime, right? So if somebody steals 15 cents out of my vehicle in the church parking lot, I'm probably not even going to say anything, but just be more careful with leaving things in my vehicle if they're there, and maybe talking to them in person. it talks a little bit about this in Matthew 18. And it talks about how you should do the discipline. It says, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him and alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. So it gives us some instructions on what to do. It does not give us, however, the consequences that we should give the person. But I think that the consequences should reflect the seriousness of whatever the action was. If somebody stole 15 cents out of my vehicle, I would say don't put him in charge of the money. But I don't think that, like, it's not necessarily going to disqualify them from doing any service necessarily in the church. And I think we have to take it on a case-by-case basis, because it's not exactly, I think that's sort of I think that church discipline becomes pretty tricky, and we need to be mindful to listen to the Holy Spirit and understand what the Spirit is telling us to do, because if we make a wrong step, then just as it says here, we might lose a brother. So we need to be careful to make sure that the discipline that we're giving them is intended to bring them into the fold and not push them away, and make sure that it also is as a church, we need to make sure that we're careful and make sure that it doesn't push other members away either with the discipline that we give the person. Yes.
You wouldn't want to go up with a holier than thou attitude. I think you need to be humble, and your words, the way you word it, it's going to make a whole lot of difference. When I had some foster children, I had 2 that stole while they were living with me. One stole 2 or 3 grapes off of in the grocery store. And when he came out and he was eating those, I said, "Where did you get those?" "Well, I just took them." I said, "No, that's not right. We have to pay for them. Let's go back in and talk to the produce manager." And he was only 7. And we went back in there, and the way the guy that handled that, he said, "I could call the cops, because you stole from me." But he says, I think we won't this time. But, are you going to ever do that again?" And he was sobbing so hard. "No." And so when I got home with him, I said, "Now, we don't want to ever do that again, right?" "No." And so the way the produce guy handled it was so much better than just, and he knew what I was doing, because I looked at him and I said, he needs to apologize for something. And so the produce man knew what I was trying to do. So if he had handled that differently, who knows what would have turned out for this young man later in his life, So attitude and the way you handle it is very important.
I agree. All right, one more, and then we'll call it.
It just reminded me when I was teaching high school in California, and I was teaching at continuation high school. many times I would tell students, mercy is better than justice. And I'm not sure, I think the Lord put that in my mouth, and I'm not sure I understand it. But I think it helps some kids, because that is the way God is. His mercy is greater than justice. We should all die and go to the pit, but God made a way of escape.
All right, would somebody like to offer up a prayer to close us out? All right.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your loving kindness, giving us life and calling and duty and responsibility. The gospel, help us to learn wisdom and knowledge, treasures in heaven above. Its value is more than rubies and gold and silver. Study to show ourselves approved. Thank you for Craig speaking today, this afternoon. Bless his family and his thoughts, and teach us to mind you and know what the importance is to be in that kingdom, dear Lord. Thank you for helping me with my truck repair. Prayer answered. Help us not to be flippant and harsh with you, oh Lord, and help us to the fellowship you intended. In our Redeemer's name, and help us to sow good things that we can reap the things we need. Help us, bless us all, and help us to be servants for you, and not be afraid of a government of the world or atomic bombs. Help us to fear you, that can destroy both the body and soul and hell. Like David said, he was fearfully made in Jesus' name, Christ's name too. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys.
So we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll be back at it.